In 2006, the John Templeton Foundation conducted this massive study to look at the potential health benefits of intercessory prayer, meaning can remotely praying for sick people directly improve their health. This was by no means the first scientific study to look at prayer's effectiveness. Francis Galton, the infamous Victorian statistician and the half-cousin of Charles Darwin, tried his own studies in the late 19th century, including one where he himself prayed over different plots of land to see if the prayed over plants would grow any faster than the ones left undisturbed. They didn't. But whereas that study was done somewhat tongue-in-cheek, the 2006 study was meant to be an exemplar of scientific rigor. Led by Harvard's Herbert Benson, the study involved 1,802 participants, all suffering from heart issues and about to undergo heart surgery, spread over 6 different hospitals. And what they did is they split these 1,800 people into 3 groups. Now, to control for patients' expectations, both the first and the second group were both told that they may or may not be put on a prayer list. In reality, only the first actually was on the prayer list, which meant that there were a bunch of Christians who were instructed to pray for them for 14 straight days, starting with the day before their surgery, for their health to improve and them to have no complications. Now, because of random assignment, and because the sample sizes for both groups were so large, about 600 people per group, that meant that these groups were functionally identical. The only systematic difference between the two was that one group was being prayed for and the other wasn't. So this was a true experimental design. Now, interestingly, there was a third group. To actually look at the effect of patients' expectations, this third group was prayed for, but was also told that they would certainly be prayed for. Now, obviously, the medical staff had no idea which patients were in which group. And what the researchers did was looked at the number of complications that happened for patients in the various groups. Now, in this particular surgery, there's about a 50% chance of a complication, which means that we were sure to get a reasonably high number in each group. But the question is, were those patients in the prayed for group likely to experience fewer complications? Now, it might not surprise many of you to learn that they didn't. There was no statistically significant effect. Those who were in the prayed for group experienced a 52% complication rate, whereas those who were in the group that weren't prayed for experienced a 51% complication rate, numbers that weren't statistically different. There was also no difference in the mortality rate between the two groups. But what was interesting is that between the two groups that were both prayed for, there was a difference, but perhaps not in the direction that you'd expect. In group 3, the complication rate was 59%. In other words, there was more complications for the people who were being prayed for, who knew that they were being prayed for, something that might be attributable to the stress or the guilt or any other psychological factor involved. So these results show that intercessory prayer, that is, prayer that's meant to intercede on one's behalf, has no direct effect on health, something which in the intervening years has been supported by meta-analyses, which are large analyses which pool together a lot of studies. And what they find is that the more tightly controlled the study, the more scientifically rigorous it was, the less likely they are to find evidence of any effect. But while these types of studies fail to find any scientific evidence for a metaphysical mechanism linking prayer to health, this isn't to say that there might not be any indirect benefits from other aspects of religion.
So I declare in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I am healed.
There's actually an enormous literature linking religiosity and health. A search of PubMed, which is a journal catalog, shows 800 articles with both the word health and religiosity in the title. These studies and meta-analyses of these studies routinely show a positive relationship. That is, the more religious somebody is, the lower their levels of heart disease, of stroke, of kidney failure, of emphysema, of cancer mortality, the lower their blood pressure, the lower their levels of chronic pain, and of overall mortality. But this overall effect hides a number of interesting nuances, which give us information about what the mechanisms are underlying this relationship. For one, religiosity is directly tied to a variety of better health habits. Those groups that abstain from behaviors we know to be bad for you, smoking or drug abuse or risky sexual behaviors, unsurprisingly enjoy the health benefits of doing so. But the other two factors that are instrumental in this religiosity-health connection are what we could call coping and company. There are various aspects of religion that help people cope with life stressors. Certain religious practices help. Meditation, which is featured in a number of religious traditions, has been causally shown to improve health, in part through stress reduction and also through bolstering the immune system. Slingerland talked about a number of rituals that also serve the stress reduction effect. And also certain psychological states, things like higher self-esteem or a greater sense of control and purpose or optimism, have measurable benefits for health. Religious fundamentalists tend to be more optimistic than religious moderates, and religious moderates tend to be more optimistic than those with more liberal beliefs. But just as significant, if not more so, is the effect of social networks and social support. So it's been extensively demonstrated that those who attend religious services more have larger and tighter social networks. And those social networks can offer health benefits in both tangible and intangible ways. They can provide instrumental aid, so physical help if you're elderly or ill, and they can provide socio-emotional support. And they can also pray for you, which, though we know it doesn't have any metaphysical benefits, can make you feel good, or it can give you extra heart complications. Now, there's a ton of research on this social support explanation. Here's one compelling study which shows how the health benefits of religion are due to its being interlaced with the social fabric. Olga Stavrova of the University of Cologne noted that almost all of the research linking religiosity with health was done in the United States, which is a much more religious country than, say, her home Germany. And so what she did was looked at large data sets with over 80,000 respondents in 59 countries to see whether that relationship was robust across all those countries. And what she found was something very telling. The health effects were only found in those countries where religion was the norm, that is, where it was both common and socially desirable. Take a look at this graph. On the y-axis, we have the strength of the relationship between religiosity and health. The 0 point indicates no relationship, whereas the further above 0 you go, the stronger the positive relationship. And the further below 0, the more religiosity is related to lower levels of health. On the x-axis, we have this measure of how much religion is a social norm. Sweden, Norway, Germany, etc. are where religion is least normative. Nigeria, Indonesia, Pakistan are where religion is most normative. And you can see this positive relationship. You can also see all the countries at or below the 0 line, including Canada. Meanwhile, the United States is way up there. So this is another instance where it's very important for us to broaden our empirical investigation beyond just the United States, looking at the whole world and taking cultural context seriously. Just looking at the United States would give us a misleading view of the global effect. Interestingly, having seen that the effect is so culturally dependent, Stavrova next elected to look within the United States, but to look at the different geographical cultures that the country is divided into. For example, religion is a much bigger part of life in the southeastern states, the Bible Belt, than it is here on the Pacific. And as you can see here, Stavrova found the same pattern of results that we saw before. The relationship between religiosity and health is strongest in the most religious parts of the country, and all but absent here on the godless West Coast.
Every day, I'm gonna rejoice every day. Every day. Yeah. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy.
Interestingly, the pattern of results linking religiosity and health closely mirror that linking religiosity and happiness. Here too, there's a robust collection of literature, and most of the research again has been done in the United States. That said, it clearly tells the story of a positive relationship. Religious people tend to be happier than non-religious people, and the more religious they are, the happier they tend to be. Here's a chart showing the percentage of people who describe themselves as very happy, the highest available option on the survey, as a function of their church attendance. As you can see, the more you attend, the more likely you are to be part of this elite emotional group of very happy people. Just looking at the positive and negative emotions one experiences, it also varies by church attendance in the same way. The more you attend, the more positive emotions you are likely to have experienced, and the fewer negative. And there are dozens of other charts and studies that tell the same story. But why? Well, it turns out that our coping and company explanation that we had for the connection between religiosity and health is also the best explanation for the connection between religiosity and happiness. Here are a few studies that lead us to that conclusion. One is that there's a Sunday effect for well-being. Now, we talked about the Sunday effect in an earlier lecture, that religious people are more likely to give to charity and less likely to visit porn sites on Sundays. Well, it turns out that for the religious, well-being also peaks on Sundays, whereas for the rest of us, it peaks a little earlier. And what happens for the religious on Sundays? Well, that's when they get to indulge in the social communities built by their church. In fact, analyses run by sociologists Robert Putnam and Chai-Yun Lim explicitly show that it is religious attendance, not prayer, not belief, but religious attendance, that explains why the religious tend to be happier than the non-religious in America. And what explains why it's religious attendance is the friendship networks and social support that people form in their congregations. One of the cleverest demonstrations of the social explanation for the religiosity-happiness link was a study that was run by Ryan Ritter and his colleagues. What they did was ran linguistic analyses on tweets tweeted out by Christians and atheists, and then measured the relative number of positive emotion and negative emotion words in those tweets. Now, the way that they determined who was an atheist and who was a Christian was by looking at the people that you followed. Those people that followed, say, the Pope or Rick Warren or Joel Osteen were characterized as Christians because people who follow those people would be assumed to be Christians. Whereas those people who followed, say, Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, noted atheists who tweeted atheist things, would have been categorized as atheists under the assumption that it's atheists who follow these people. What Ritter and colleagues found is that the content of the tweets tweeted out by the Christians contained more positive emotion words and fewer negative emotion words than did those tweeted out by the atheists. But more interesting were some of the other differences between the groups. Christians tweeted more social words, words like friend or mate, than did the atheists, whereas the atheists tweeted more insight words, words with think or consider. But what was most interesting is that through using statistical techniques, the authors could determine that it was the use of those words that drove the difference between the emotional tone of the tweets of the two groups. That is, the Christians were happier than the atheists because they used more social words and because they used fewer insight words. So that sort of fits our stereotypes of the two groups, right? So the Christians going to their church group, gaily singing hymns in between bake sales, and the teenage atheist boy in his room listening to The Cure and complaining into his journal about how the world doesn't understand him. Maybe that was just me. But this stereotype issue brings up one of the main limitations of the study, one that the keen viewer might have picked up on. The way Ritter and colleagues categorized the Christians and atheists was problematic insofar as you're not really going to get a representative group of, say, all atheists. There's a specific subset that choose to follow people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris online, and there are many types of non-believers who don't fit that subset. For instance, if you were to get a sample of non-believers who aren't unified by the rejection of religion, but are unified by, say, the wonder of science or the lovingness of humanism, would you get different results? But the fact that it's the social connections that make religious people happier than non-religious people makes a lot of sense. After all, we know that it is social relationships that really are the keystone of happiness. And we've talked a lot about how religions are groupish, binding people tightly together better than almost anything else. Religion allows you to be part of a group embedded in a culture. And if that's what's responsible for the religion well-being connection, then we should expect the same pattern of results as we saw with religion and health. That the effect should be more pronounced in places where religion is the majority and attenuated in places where religion is the minority. That's exactly what was found in an important paper by Adiner and colleagues. Looking at large American and global data sets, they conceptually replicated a lot of what we've already seen, finding that religion is a strong positive predictor of subjective well-being. But they found that this effect wasn't evenly spread out between places. As expected, it was in the highly religious countries where the difference in well-being between religious people and non-religious people was most stark. Have a look at this set of graphs. Here you see the differences on people's subjective evaluation of their lives and on the degree to which they reported having positive and negative feelings in the previous day. But in the least religious countries, those in the bottom quartile of religiosity, there were no differences at all on life evaluation and positive feelings, and religious people actually reported feeling more negative feelings than did the non-religious. The happiness-religion link is context dependent, but some other aspects of their findings might help us understand why. The relationship between religiosity and happiness was mediated by feeling socially supported and respected. In places where religion is the norm, being religious involves being part of the dominant culture, with all the community benefits and social respect that entails. But in places where religion is aberrant, one might not enjoy the same social dividends for piety. In fact, what the researchers found was that in less religious countries, the non-religious did not lack for social respect and support. It was something that they'd already found from non-religious sources, and thus they had high social well-being anyways, without religion. So clearly the company half of coping and comforting is involved. But what about coping? Well, in a sense, these two aren't completely separable. Company helps one cope in the face of difficult life circumstances. But there was more evidence from Diener's analysis. The third variable that mediated the relationship between religiosity and health was purpose and meaning. Religious people had more of that, and the more they had, the happier they were. But more interesting was that another dimension on which the religiosity happiness link depended was that of how difficult life was in each society. The researchers looked at this at both the country and US state level, ranking the places on things like life expectancy, crime rate, and the degree to which one's basic needs were met. And what they found was that in places where life is nasty, brutish, and short, religiosity was positively associated with all the indicators of well-being. So religion appears to help people cope, palliating the negative emotional effects of struggling through difficult life circumstances. But here in places like utopian Vancouver, things are different. Life is not difficult, and there are an abundance of things in which people can find happiness. As a result, one doesn't need religion to cope, and so one doesn't need religion to be happy. This explanation for why religion is associated with well-being benefits meshes with some of the stuff we talked about way back in our lecture on existential security. It also aligns with how Karl Marx thought about religion. Marx had this famous passage where he talked about the comforting function that religion serves in difficult life circumstances. He said, "Religion is the sigh of the oppressed, the heart in a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. Religion is the opium of the masses." But as we've seen, like opium, religion can make one happy, but unlike opium, religion can actually be good for your health, at least if you're in the right society.